All right, we are back for another episode with the OG team, and it's time for us to do our annual NFCA recap reflections. I realized when I was, obviously Paul comes with us, our media marketing guy comes with us to NFCA, and he always asks me to do a recap at the end. And as he asked me, I realized it's always such NFCA is it's a little overwhelming, and there's a lot going on, and it's fast moving. It's a time of the year where we're all busy, but it's also at the end of it, when he was asking me to recap, it's also a nice time to be wow, both let's think about all of the growth in softball, which is just amazing, and also with ourselves. And so I think that it's kind of a fun, even though the time of year, sometimes you're is this the best time for us all to be having to do this? It's also kind of nice because it's towards the end of the year, and it just gives you a good time for reflection. So maybe let's start with, what was something that surprised you at NFCA this year? Whether that was because it was wow, that surprised me how far we've come. That surprised me how far we haven't come. That surprised me that happened at NFCA. I don't, you could take that however you want. But maybe let's start with something that surprised you guys at NFCA. I feel like Ashley's ready.
Something. Yeah. I'm ready. You felt?
I'm always ready. She's always ready.
I felt it.
Through the screen.
God, that's so not surprising that I was exuding this, I have an answer and I can't hold it in anymore. Okay, so I did a panel for the pitching fireside this year. Boo at Notre Dame invited me to do it, which I really appreciated. And I've only ever been at the pitching fireside chat one other time with all of you. And we were in the audience and we were just listening. And that was maybe 2 years ago, I want to say. I feel like it was 2 years ago. And the questions, we were just it reminded me of being in chemistry in college, where I was in the back row, barely alive, just listening to everybody else with wasn't expecting to engage. I was just kind of what is this? I kind of want to get a feel. And I just honestly was not interested. This is not that nice, but it's very honest. The questions were the audience is broad. It's people who teach 10-year-olds up to someone who won the national championship last year. It's in college. So it's such a broad audience. The questions were just so off the map of what the world that we live in at OGX and what we're trying to drive pitching into. They were it was the wrong questions. Not that you might say there's no wrong question, but it was the questions were about the noise that you want to get out of, the weeds you want to get out of. And just to be totally honest, I just was this is not interesting to me. And I think pitching is so interesting, obviously. And I was just I just don't care to ask a question, engage. I didn't feel any sense of passion or inspiration in that room. That is just my honest thoughts and how I was feeling. And then obviously I think we got called out to answer something, and we had to be shit, what are we talking about? Because we were snoozing in the back row. So anyway, I learned from that experience. But being on the panel this year, one thing that I just thought generally is the questions in the audience were elevated. That's the best way that I can explain that, is that even though the audience was still broad, even though it went from people who coach 10-year-olds in the private setting all the way to people who are in the national championship year after year, or trying to be, it just was there was a clear energy around information, data. Things kept coming up old school versus new school, which I chimed in and said, I don't really think we should think about it as old school versus new school. It's really the bridge of data information we haven't seen before merging with the art of coaching we've always had, right? We just don't only have our eyes in art of coaching anymore. We have this new level. So it's this. And so I thought the whole discussion was all around questions that were about that concept, which just generally really took me aback, because I'm it was only 2 years ago where we were just, oh my gosh, I think you probably could have recorded one of those out of 2010 and recorded the one from 2 years ago. And I bet there was not that much difference. That's what it felt like in the audience. And that might be a little bit too, I might be attacking a little bit too much, but it's what it felt like. I'm oh my gosh, we're not moving anywhere. And I came out of that room, joined you guys, and I was I think this is really important to note that the conversation as a whole was elevated, and we've had a huge role in that. And so I just want to like take a minute to say like pat on the back, guys, like you have to keep trucking, because even the people that were asking questions of like, I have no idea how to get involved with data, they at least were recognizing the fact that like, how do I start using some information, because I know I can no longer just like not see any there were so many questions about plyos, and to us we're like, plyos have been around for us for like, I mean, I don't know how many years. But 5 years, let's say, right? Yeah. And so yes, for us it might feel like questions like that are still like a 5-year-old question, but it that whole conversation is elevated about plyos, appropriate warm-ups, workload, using data, like all kinds of stuff. And I just was like, wow, this is really good. So I think that surprised me. I definitely did not expect. I got like a little nervous about being on that panel, because I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to stick out here. Like, I'm like, who brought that person? You know, she's like loud, talks too fast, no one can understand her, and she's talking about shit that's from the Jetsons. Like, that's what I thought it was going to be like. And instead, I was just like, no, I feel like there is a sense of community here. Yes, some people are a little bit further down the spectrum of like their journey and how they're getting involved in player development and data in you know, basically like data analytics and player development, and some people a little bit further down that spectrum, but we're all like we're in the same book now, it feels like. So that's my answer. I definitely was pleasantly surprised by that. And I think it's a really good sign for pitching, for the game, and for OGX, to be quite honest, you know, of like we've been on this mission for a really long time to like push the conversation, to move the needle, and have thought like, you know, not that we were the only ones ever doing it, but feel a responsibility to like have a level of information that keeps pulling people to want to know more. And I felt good about it. And I felt like proud of us, because I know that we're a big part of why that is happening in that room. So that's mine.
Yeah. I think just to piggyback and keep it kind of short, because it's a little bit similar, but I think two things helped this. I think, you know, the reflection of how different some of the conversations were. I think the fact that Driveline was with us, who was an outsider in the softball space, and sort of was coming into a community and a space that they weren't as familiar with, and some of their reflections as people who aren't as in it on the day-to-day or kind of in the weeds. I think that combination of things, just I found myself a lot reflecting on, you know, there was such a like angst that we felt at the beginning of like, you know, we're kind of trying to push things forward, and there's this pushback of it. And I think there was some truth to that at the very beginning, let's say 5 years ago, when it was so new and we didn't even understand it enough to be delivering the information in a clear, probably enough way to bring people along. But I think a lot of that angst that we felt doesn't feel as warranted anymore, and I think is different in softball than a baseball community. And I think, you know, where you might hear us saying like, if only we could do things like X, if only we could be like this other thing, and you know, we're always wanting to be better, and so we're looking at what else we could grab. What I felt like surprised by and proud of, I think, and excited about was softball, and the community, especially in the collegiate space, has really stepped up and shown, if you can deliver information in a way that I can understand and I can apply it and helps me and helps my players, I'm going to come along really fast. And I think like the quickness to which the game has in the past few years, as more and more information has come into play, as more people have entered the space that are willing to translate that information and to provide it in a user-friendly way, which I think is where, Ashley, you kind of give us a pat on the back, because, you know, we've really been striving to do that, but there are other players also doing that. A Synergy, a 643, these players that have come into the space and delivered really user-friendly technology solutions that feel really applicable to the coaches, that the coaches and the community is running with it at a lightning speed. And that was what was so sort of like shocking in some ways about the pitching panel, was like 2 years ago, we had people saying the best way to track the way the ball broke was to catch pitchers. And this year, that panel, which had some overlap with the people who were on that panel 2 years ago, were like, okay, but why would we do that anymore when I can use data? I can do this. I can do all these things that were faster. And I think instead of showing what I think we took it as, and so I think maybe even just like a critique of ourselves, what we took it as 2 years ago was like, oh God, these people are so resistant. And what they actually showed, and what the community has actually showed is, I'm not resistant to it. It just wasn't presented to me in a way that made any sense. So at the time, for me, the most applicable way for me to see break and the most manageable and digestible way was for me to catch people. But if you give me a better way to do it, I will adopt it. And I think that has been incredible. I think it's an incredible testimonial of our sport. I think it is very clear it's a sport driven by women. Because of that, I think that's just the reality, that women are willing to be vulnerable, are willing to grow. And I think it's a testament to a sport that is driven, especially at the collegiate level. I'm saying that for a reason, especially at the collegiate level, by women, or sort of like feminine sensibility, that are willing to be vulnerable and to grow and to put themselves out there. And I think that is amazing. I think it's so exciting for how fast the game can continue to grow from those standpoints. And that was what, like, surprised, excited, like, lit me up while we were there. It was just like, wow, our community is like, we're doing it. Like, it's really good. It's pretty exciting.
I was thinking a lot. I'm going to go big shout out here to our pal, Trisha Ford. But I think she's a great representative of this like movement in the community. Here is a figure where people are like, she is a rock star. Look what she does when she gets to a program. Look what she does to her athletes. Look at the stage she gets them to. She just is like this unbelievable coach and force. And she gets up there and talks about like the people that she surrounds herself with, the like entities and organizations that she utilizes. It's like, yes, individually she is a rock star, and also she's this rock star in identifying how to expand her system and resources to like, maximize what's in front of her. And I think she's a great representation of like, if she's up there and she's going to talk about like her web. And I think it's like this open invitation. It's like, to be great, create a network, create people who help you, create the resources. It's not a sign of you're not good enough. And I think early on in these 5 years ago, there probably was some vibe of like, I have to show that I can do it. I don't need to bring someone else on. And this like openness and willingness to be like, that has nothing to do with it. There is just simply so many things on your plate. There's only so much capacity you have. It's really about identifying the right people. I mean, like, think about the phrase from the beginning of time, it takes a village, right? And it doesn't mean that someone is not of the right level of expertise or value or is not right for the job. It's just like, if you want to maximize, get the right village. And that sometimes that's people, and sometimes it's resources, and it's tech, and it's, whatever those things are. And anyway, I think she's like a great representative of someone who's always been so outspoken about that, because, she's like driven so little by some things like ego. And it's like this invitation. People are like, well, she's the freaking best. Like, and if she's doing that, I'm not less than, because I'm also asking for some like help from this or from that. So, that kind of comes to mind, Krista, as like this literally like physical embodiment of that like shift in mindset here. Like, it's not a weakness to be reaching out to like people like us and to, sources of technology, or asking other companies to like interpret this for me, show me this, make this easier for me. It's a necessity now. And so you want to find the people who like do it best, and that's clearly where it's at. And it's awesome. It's really awesome.
I think for me, my experience at NFCA was very different this year. I'm usually, either scoping out technology or having conversations with these different companies of, usually it's a sell, and that's the point, right? For them to come to us and say, here's our product. How can we, how could you leverage this? And what I actually realized was in some of the demos that we did, and, we've been creating this internally for several months. It is a transition from if you've worked with us a long time, our very sheets-based stuff now into a web app that is going to get, internally released to our athletes. We're on our way to that. And as I was demoing even our really kind of, initial version of this to coaches that had never worked with us before, and just showing them the simplicity of putting the information in them and putting the information in front of them in a meaningful way. So I sort of credit this like kind of this collision of, you have coaches that are, they recognize that maybe I don't have the budget to go out and get all this high-end stuff. I feel, have given them this confidence of, all right, let's start somewhere and let's put that information in however you collect it. Low end, pencil and paper, track and velo, to high-end marker-based biomechanics, ball flight, all of it. Our ability to consult and provide coaches with guidance and consulting and solutions to leveraging that information, regardless of its place on the spectrum in terms of low end or high end or cost, it gives them the confidence that like, okay, I'm doing something, I'm taking a step forward. And I feel like it's those coaches in particular that I had a chance to talk to and to show our systems that were like, okay, I see how this is of value to me. I don't have all the bells and whistles right now, but I recognize that like there are some things here that I could really, really utilize, even if it's simply, again, the example, velocity tracking. It doesn't have to be complicated. And for them to see that in its, in a really rough state and be so impressed by it. I'm like, wow, this softball community is so hungry for some platform, ours or some platform that just tells a good story. And we have spent so much time and will continue to spend this time as we advance with markerless biomechanics through our partnership with Driveline, our work with UNO. We will continue to drive ourselves to be storytellers, because that's where, to me, that's where the data gets lost, is when it cannot be translated. It can't be brought to the coach in a way that's meaningful. And it's something just in showing this, I say it's silly, but it's been a ton of work for us to get to a point where we've, we joke about, all the goats that exist in Google Sheets. And I joked yesterday that the herd may be scattered, but I know where all of our goats are, to a point now where we're so consolidated and so scalable in the way we can present information back. And coaches are like, yes, I want that. It's like, it's the concept of like, if you build it, they will come, right? And they're hungry for it. And the conversations were so positive. I felt no, like, I'll say pushback. They're all like, yes, how can I have this? This is amazing. How can I utilize this? And I just thought, like, this is the beginning. Like, we are just getting started in this particular space. And like, it's so exciting. It's just so exciting.
Yeah. I think one of the things I would say, like, off of that, this is not sort of like what surprised me, but then like these are also positive, but then a cautionary tale about where your strengths and what makes this community great can get taken advantage of a bit, and where we find ourselves fighting a little bit, which is, I think what is so powerful about the systems we've built is that while they're in rough form, as you say, and we're like, well, this is just like, we're not, we haven't designed these, you haven't had a UI person yet, we're not a tech company in that sense. And it doesn't look as flashy as if I go and get an app. But what's powerful about it is that we use it. Mm-hmm. We built it to use. We take technology. I think we've referenced this before, where people are like, aren't you just in the lab? And it's like, what is so powerful about what we do at OGX is that we hold ourselves and our coaches and our athletes accountable to use the information and technology and data that we are collecting to show, are you getting better? And what we care about is, are our athletes getting better? And our athletes means the college athletes we consult with, the athletes who are in our facility, the athletes we work with around the country, like, are our athletes getting better? And so the tools that we are designing, which ultimately coaches then can use, are tools that we design for ourselves and for our athletes to be able to use that. And I think, we had a lot of conversations as we're talking about Launchpad builds with Driveline and conversations where a theme that came up for some of the coaches is like, this looks amazing, but we get pitched shit all the time and then it doesn't work. And what I think is so powerful about the work we're doing with Driveline, the work we have done internally, where our two companies honestly overlap and why this partnership makes sense, is that there might be issues, like, there might be issues with our HQ platform because, like, of what I just said. We're not tech people. We don't have the infrastructure yet from a tech standpoint. It might take us a couple iterations to get it exactly right. But we can't and aren't going to sell you anything that isn't going to work because we use it. These are systems that we have to use. And so if it doesn't work for you, it doesn't work for me. And if it's not serving you, it's not serving our athletes, it's not serving our coaches. And I think where we sometimes, as people who are like so willing to grow, which is so amazing about our community, and want the next thing and want to understand how I can get better and take on the next thing, is that we jump too fast maybe, or don't ask the right questions about, and it doesn't make these companies that they're structured wrong. You need all kinds of different structures into companies. It's not like every tech company needs to have coaches in it using, like, that's not what I'm saying. But to understand the way each of these companies that's coming to you with a variety of player development type solutions is structured. What are their incentives? Does that align with my incentives? Am I asking the right question based on their incentives? And I think for the coaches, like, the other thing I would say is that some of the trends we're seeing is that sometimes our positives start to make us our weaknesses too, where we see softball coaches being able to like get taken advantage of easier, or think this is going to solve something that's not going to solve, because we don't understand where our incentives no longer align. So one of the examples I gave, this isn't necessarily an example of someone getting like taken advantage of, but I think something we've misunderstood about softball and data sharing, because we just haven't asked the right question about how is our structure different. And one is in this in-game data sharing usage. We obviously are the ones that like, yes, share the data. We want to share the data. And there is some frustration around, why aren't we sharing the data more? Why aren't the in-game companies designed better to be able to share them? Why aren't the in-game companies designed better to visualize this data better for us? And what I would say is like, why would they be? Our system was never set up for that. It's not, that's not the expectation you had, that's what they were going to be set up to do, was the wrong expectation based on the structure. So if you look at how data sharing and in-game data sharing and what companies were incentivized to do on the baseball side, you had MLB. So the reason people wanted something like StatCast, the reason people wanted that in-game data to go into something like StatCast is because they could make a hell of a lot of money on betting if the data was out there. And that is just blanket statement. It wasn't because Driveline was going to go take that in-game data and build player development systems. That just ended up being a very pleasant side thing that was able to happen, byproduct of it. And the reason the college companies that came into this space were structured in a way that so easily shared data was because a big carrot for them was to take that data, to get the college companies to opt into it, and to sell that data back to the MLB. And so they had a lot of incentive to, it's going to be really important for you to say, yes, go ahead, share our data for our business model to work like that. As the softball companies were coming, as these companies were coming in, who weren't always the same companies, were coming into the softball space, they didn't need to design their businesses around that structure. There was no selling it to anything. And so it became about hardware. And maybe we can do this. Maybe we can combine and do camps, because that's where we could make more money. So let's focus on something with camps. Let's focus on all of these things. And it's not a knock. You have to, as a business, think about, what am I going to align? But then I think the like shock of some of us, or in the softball community, of like, wait, we thought this was going to serve us the exact same way it was going to in the other space. And I didn't even ask maybe the right questions of what the technology was going to be able to do for me. I think we got to just really be smart about how overlapping is this company's incentives and my incentives. What are the questions I need to ask them about how it's going to be able to serve me, in what way it's going to be able to serve me? None of those companies are going back and using their data in that way. They're providing you a product, and their product has to make revenue, and they have to think about, in the softball space, how they're able to do that. And so we have to be incentivized as a softball community of recognizing that, and then figuring out, okay, well, we don't like the way that can serve us. So can we structure as a community differently to incentivize them to do something else? Can we, put pressures in different ways? Can we do things? But I think this, like, it's just, I think we could go into some of those conversations with the wrong mindset, or the like annoyance. And we do this too. I include us in this annoyance that like, well, it works this way in baseball and it doesn't work this way in softball, and we're mad about that, or it does this and it does this, without understanding, like, it doesn't make it bad. It doesn't make it that they can't make profit in softball. It doesn't make it that, anything necessarily bad from that standpoint. But to really come at it with a solution, we're going to have to ask the right questions. We're going to have to ask what this company's incentives are. We're going to have to ask why we're adopting this technology. Do we align? Where do we align? What questions do I need to know about it? And I think sometimes in our community, because of all the amazing things that we just recapped, I think sometimes our strength becomes a little bit of a weakness where we just want to grab all of it without taking a second and backing up and thinking like, why am I grabbing this? And maybe I really do need it, but then what are my expectations about what's getting delivered to me? And does that expectation even make sense for what this company's like incentives are? And I think that is really important.
Sorry, I have two things that what you said about the hardware. It has dawned on me over the last, obviously since NFCA, but as we've, stepped away from it and really reflected on our experience there, of what you said rings so true. Thinking about the business model of a tech company that is selling you hardware, right? There has to be an initial investment to even have a product, which means they have sunk money into building this hardware. I am very skeptical. You guys know I am like, unless we see raw data, I don't trust anything, because I just know that we're not there yet as a softball tech community of really even knowing what's appropriate to visualize, what are the right things that we should be telling a story with. And so I caution, the coaching community on two things. One, you're Krista, absolutely correct. If they are selling you hardware, and I think we all can think of examples of this that currently exist. If they are selling you hardware, what they are trying to get you to buy into is the hardware. And that's where they're going to put their money and investment, because they've sunk money into that already. So when the app doesn't work, when the data doesn't visualize the way that you want, when you can't access the data in the way that you want, it's not a planned design. It's sort of a fatal flaw in those companies. And I see why it happens. It is, it sounds like a knock, but I get it. You've invested and sunk money into a physical product, and without a way to show that information on the other side, the data's lost, right? And I think that was where the power of, we've internally named this HQ. It's our central hub for everything. That was where the power of HQ came in those conversations. Was it doesn't matter what your hardware is. We can take that information within reason, and we can provide you some things. And so I think there has been this misstep of trust, where a company comes in with a piece of technology, a hardware, and as you said, we have these expectations of what that's supposed to look like because we have an MLB model, and it's just not there. We don't know quite yet in all of our spaces. At the highest levels of our game, with high level information like biomechanics reports, we're not there. That is a ton of groundwork that does not exist right now that we are developing. And so that's my first point of caution. And my second one is the accountability piece. If there is a company, technology or otherwise, that is selling you some system, whether it is a assessment system, a piece of technology, a app of some kind, I think your comment about incentives is very interesting. How do they hold themselves accountable, right? We know how our systems hold us accountable, hold our families accountable, hold our coaches accountable. How do those companies that are selling you something at high as hell price tags, how are they holding themselves accountable? Will their information iterate, and will you benefit from that, right? Our community, when we learn something, we are free to share it, right? We know that that's what drives innovation, is the sharing of this. If what you're being sold is a sort of a static product, whether again, it's physical or otherwise, I love the concept of what's their incentive. Do they have accountability to that? Are they making claims that have no information behind it? I tread cautiously on that, because again, sort of young and eager coaches, you're going to get swindled a little bit. And I think that that's a very real thing. And just to stop and ask yourself that question of what do they gain from me buying into this? And are they holding themselves accountable to that system actually being worth something, and doing the things that they say?
Yeah. I think sometimes we just ask too much of the companies.
Right.
I just think I think there's both cases. It's not just tech companies, as you say. We're very much talking about any player development company that comes into the space and says, I think the first question you're asking is what problem does this solve for me? What problem does this solve for me? And then how does it solve that? And then what are their incentives to make sure that solution is real? I think that's kind of what you're asking along it. And so, I think there's a ball flight company coming into the space that's been around for a while in baseball, and I think everyone wants them to come in the space. It's so exciting, and I know for a fact that what they give you is the raw data. And what is powerful about it is like that's always what they've given you, and you get free access to it. And so you do have to then go and find someone of like, well, what am I doing with this? Do I have someone on staff that can visualize it? Do I need to buy some way to visualize it? Do I bring in other companies? It's not a bad thing about that company. It's just that's what their product is, and it's reliable, and it's what you expect, and it's all of these things. And I think sometimes we are asking something to be the solution to everything. We are asking it to be the solution to everything. And so it's just, you got to understand the boundaries of it. The solution is that platform gathers in-game ball flight data reliably. That's it. And it gives it to you in a raw form. And so you decide what you need to do from that. And you just need to understand those boundaries. And I think we get a little cross for that. We're looking for the solution. We're looking for the answer to everything. And then we get let down by the companies because we're like, well, what am I supposed to do with this now? Like, I have something, I can't even do anything with it because we didn't ask the right questions in the conversation. And I think, like, what are you solving with that? Was that an issue you actually had? Or did they create an issue for you to try to solve? Like, what are you solving with that? How is it solving that? In what ways are you implementing that? How are you holding yourself accountable to whether that's being solved? And then how are they holding themselves accountable to how it's being solved? Like, those are the questions I think you have to ask. And what we feel comfortable in, just from our own sense, is we're solving the problem of how to make a player better in health and in performance, right? The way we solve that is we measure everything constantly, and we've iterated on that. And we've intervened ourselves in those iterations, and we've seen how they have worked and not worked. And the way we still hold ourselves accountable is that continues to be a very core avenue of our business. We don't just give it to someone and say like best of luck. We are very core part of our business is still that we are every day doing that with athletes on our own. And then how you hold yourself accountable is that we're now putting those tools of how we hold ourselves accountable into your own hands, of data visualization, of tracking, of all of these things. That's kind of our answer to that. And so I think that's the question I think we have to keep asking as a community who's so hungry for information, who's so hungry for growth, of like, yes, but don't go wild here, because you will kill yourself with the amount of work you're going to put on and with the information you're going to try to grab. And you will convince yourself you've gone down like the magic ticket path with some piece of technology or some solution a company has told you for player development of movement or whatever, where you're going to end up like at the end of it of like, wait a minute, I went down all of this avenue and I had no way to like hold myself accountable. I had no way to hold them accountable. They didn't deliver on what I thought they were going to deliver. Were they even supposed to deliver that? Like, I think, we see that iteration happening kind of time and time again. So I think that's something that you really saw come to life. You see come to life a lot at NFCA, just when we're all together and the conversations are around that. And it's something I would just like caution, coaches to kind of be mindful of. Ash, I feel like you were trying to jump in there.
Sorry, Ash.
The things that are coming to my head are like, coaches, we have to remember like not everybody is fully educated. So a couple of years ago, there was no education. And so it's just like something comes on the market and there's this feeling of like FOMO. Anytime something comes on the market, it's like FOMO. Like, do I need that? I have like coaches all the time. They're like, I have this level of tech, but then there's this company. Should we be getting that? Should we be fundraising for this? Like they don't even understand maybe even what they have yet. And then they certainly don't understand the company that's new that's coming. And I'm talking mostly about like, some a tech company that collects ball flight data. And they're just like, what should I? They're like panicked about like, well, I don't want to spend my money on this if something better is coming out. Like it's this idea of like FOMO, keeping up. Like we saw that, we saw this like, you had meetings, Krista, with the Driveline team about some of these like, these like build outs on their campuses and people are like, well, who are they meeting with? Like there's this like Shark Tank going around of like, I've got to stay up in the tech and data space. I've got to make sure my competitors don't have the more information than I do. So I think there's this element of like that because of that level of competitiveness, it's also important to like feed a good education. So people are like, not just like jumping to what's next and new and shiny. There's like two worlds. What you guys are kind of like blending together is there are tech companies who deliver ways to look at like ball flight data. And then there are other companies who are more in like the player development space, like you're going to look at this, you're going to measure this, you're going to make them move like this, you're going to do this. Like they're related. It's all about, player development and player maximization, but there's kind of like two spaces there. And I think that, you're right, Krista, in this, like, I'm going to go all in on this. That's very, very flawed. And the challenge of it, though, is that people only have so much of a budget. So it's like, I've been told by my university I get $5,000. And so I have to choose what I should do. And so I think the challenge sometimes is that they're like, I have to just choose what I think is going to give me like the most. And I think where sometimes we can get frustrated is like, well, listen, there's a reality of the X's and O's to that, but like, that's probably not the route that you want to go, like that you might get a piece of the pie from this company or this company, but that piece is just too small for you to really like take something and like really develop with it. And so I think like education about something like this, like I think people are always looking for us to be like, they're terrible or that's ridiculous or this, that. And then we're always usually saying something like, I'm sure you can take something from that, but is it enough? There was a coach that came to me at, up to our booth, and she was like, I'm a D3 coach, very small school. My budget is very, very small. Like I get like barely anything. I'm into player development. I want to do one thing. And I've done like movement assessments. That's essentially, there was like a specific type of movement assessment. And like, that's what I do for my athletes. And that's all, because that's all I can do. And I said, like, I'm not here saying like movement schmovement, because we do movement assessments here at OGX. But the reality is, if all you're doing is seeing someone has the right mobility and then you're just like hoping you win games, I'm like, do you see the gap? Like, do you see how far apart winning games is to assessing simply if they have the right mobility? Like, that is just not enough. I'm not here to say like, what a joke, but that is just simply not enough. So what I said to her was like, of course, like I'm going to tell you things that you should do under us because we believe in this stuff. That's why we do it. But if you could choose one thing, I would either go with right away, you've got to implement plyos. You're not going to know how you're influencing their patterns and their arm action if you can't measure it, but you will be. Because every single day we see the positive impact of people throwing with plyos. So like invest in plyo and plyo programming and building that in. And or invest in some way to connect to like getting some ball flight. So you might be like, I can't help them necessarily, but at least I know what they're doing. Choose one of the other. Choose the lowest tier of like, I'm going to help build them. And what she thought she was doing is like by assessing mobility is like, I'm going to help build them. Just like you are so far away. So like you can only do one thing. Choose the most powerful but lowest hanging fruit in influencing their development, which in my mind is plyos and like the plyo protocols that go with them, not just plyos and being like, what the hell, and making your own stuff up of what you're doing with them, but like understanding how to apply them appropriately, or go find a way. If you can't get your own right now, Rapsodo is the like lowest hanging fruit, the most affordable thing that schools can get. If you can't get it yourself, people have them around you. You can ask them to rent it, like 4 times a year, whatever that looks like. And so I think things like that, I know that people can't just like, we do work with schools where they like can grab all the things that people are just trying to like maximize in their small like budgets. And I think just like being in order to make a good decision there, you also have to just be like very educated. And what you're saying is like, what will that get me though? If that goes well, if I simply just make everyone have more mobility, like what would happen? Is that enough for me? Because I'm out of money. You know what I mean? like you have to really be able to assess that. So I had a great conversation with her of like, I would not advise you to, you can keep doing that, but you're going to have to figure out how to put your resources into something else. So, yeah, I think there's just 2 worlds we can see there. I think it's just sort of like people you don't have to do a ton to make a difference. There are people that are just not doing enough, right? And like I'm saying, they're just like staying in the like things that we did a couple years ago, of like assessing something and like changing someone's first move because of it. And they're like, that's going to make me win the conference. Like, no, it freaking isn't. No, it isn't. So it's like, there's that world. And then there is the other world where it's like in the ball flight data space, where it just feels like we're expecting you to deliver everything to us because we've paid a fortune and you're a mess and we're pissed at you and that. So I think we kind of are seeing like both sides of it.
Well, I was just going to say, like, when I think about this iteration, this player development space, like when we get the data back without the story and the succinctness of it, and the fact that we have intervened and said like, did that work? No, yes. Where are we going? Did that work? No, yes. Where are we going? So we've really been able to narrow it down in what we're chasing in certain avenues. And that has been important because I think about our own journey, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we really started the path we're on now, we did that. Let's grab everything. Let's collect literally everything possible. And what happened was, it was like, okay, she doesn't have this mobility. Her power seems lower than other people. She has 6 things that seem out of normal in her biomechanics. So that doesn't seem good. She her exit velo seems above average, but she's hitting the ball on the ground a lot. I also have a sensor on her bat, and her bat speed seems X, and her pass seems whatever. And so what comes out of all of that data in a non-aggregated way, or not having been applied at all, is like, I could chase 20 things here. Right. So what I will say we have spent the last 6 years is chasing 20 things and then being like, that wasn't enough. That wasn't enough. Out of this story, the most clear, the most educated path is going to be X, and we're going to measure, what we think it will influence is Y, and we're going to measure it. And if it doesn't, we move on quickly. And that iterated over and over and over is what we have created. It's not saying this is the one thing. That is literally impossible.
No.
You
also,
are not going to
find... You know what I'm thinking about as you're saying this? Like, we do that per athlete because we're like, okay, the biggest bang for the buck for athlete A is X.
Right.
The biggest bang for the buck at athlete B. So the idea of you as a college coach with your entire team, like, we're going to take just this approach to do with this, is like, that seems ridiculous as you're saying that right now. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Anyway,
and so it's finding what you're trying to do with player development is having some sort of system in place. It's building a system. It's getting pieces to build a system where you have something in place where, as you are measuring and you are seeing something that needs addressed, she's got pain. Her power numbers are down what they're used to. There's whatever things you're capturing. You're seeing something where you're like, this seems like red flag, something is wrong. That you know whether you need to and how to chase that, right? That you know whether, do I need to intervene on this right now? Is it expected, not expected? Do I need to intervene? And how? What is the most efficient path to that intervention? And that is what we have spent years building. And so this idea that like any one thing is gonna like solve that piece is just, or like this one thing is gonna fix this kid, this one, like, no, it's not. That like it's way too complicated for that. And it requires such iteration is what we've done for so long, and we will continue to do. And we will continue to see exceptions to that. And the reason we're able to, kind of pivot so fast is because we are measuring it. So when a kid is an exception and it doesn't go the way we thought, we can pivot so much faster. It's just like you don't have time as a coach to make that kind of mistake, to chase the wrong thing for that long. Like, you just don't have time. And so you want a sort of robust system. But as you're saying, Laura, like what we feel powerful about ours, and I'm sure you could find some other versions of this, or find a person that can put your systems together, that has coding abilities or whatever. But you want a system that can intake all of that and show you and narrow the path you're choosing, and make sure, like, as soon as you're like, okay, this is the most educated guess I have right now of what's going to happen. And if it doesn't, I'm not beholden to it. So if you are in a system where you have said like, well, even if it doesn't, this is the ticket, we're driving it, that is not a good system. And so I think that world is what we have built. And so that is like, again, what is the solution? What is this supposed to, all the way back to the questions I asked before, think of it in a player development model. What is the problem this intervention is solving? More break, higher exit velo, better mobility, higher power underneath it, whatever, injury, lowering, pain. What is the solution this player development intervention is supposed to be solving, right? How am I going to measure if it's solving that, right? Is that even like, how am I measuring that? If it's supposed to be pain reduction, am I asking her a wellness questionnaire? Am I measuring something? If it's supposed to be velocity, how am I tracking that? If it's supposed to be brake, how am I tracking that? Do I have a way to hold myself accountable to that, right? And you have to then just keep measuring over and over. And sometimes what the best systems will guide you for is, you're not doing a very good job, coach. So you got to veer off, and you can't be beholden to that answer. And so I think that's the like ultimate conclusion. I have no idea what this really has to do with the NFCA recap anymore.
But here we are. It was not an NSA recap.
Started
we
there.
Didn't talk about anything NFCA.
Now we have to do another NFCA conversation because there are other things I want to talk about. But I think that is that's what player development is. And what we feel so powerful is like we have been in the trenches doing that, going wrong, having to sit across our own coaches and be like, that's not working. You can sit here all day and tell me you're going to keep doing that path. It's not working. Everything is suggesting it's not working. So you're going to have to find a different solution.
I don't care if it works for Sally, Jenny, and Susie.
Right. It's not working.
Like, it's not working for this athlete. So move off the train and get on another one. You know, I mean, it's pretty clear. Yeah.
Right. And so it's like to narrow your guesses of where to go. That's what you're ultimately getting to. So we started 6 years ago and we were like, I don't know. Let's try this one. See what happens. And we have narrowed our options, you know, very significantly from, you know, 40,000 unlimited to 20 or something, whatever we're to right now. We've narrowed our options and we've made that either like the way we will know whether this is working is X, and we will monitor that and we will pivot when it's not. We will not just be like, well, you know, she's not coachable. You know, so it's just like, you know, I think that that's the reality of what we've built. And I think why, in my mind, like what you need to be asking of those people who are serving you in that way is like, are they doing that? Is that how they built it? Are they willing to say, that's interesting? Like, are they willing to sit across from you in the way that Ashley does with consulting and the way I do with college coaches and the way you do, Laura, where the coach is saying like, I know you said this is going to work, but like, it's not. And so are they willing to be like, okay, let's look at all the pieces. Where are we going? Are they willing to do that? Or are they just going to say like, you're not implementing it right. You're not understanding the technology. The environment's not right.
That's impossible for something to say it's going to work and it doesn't. It's like, that's impossible. Of course it works. Like, no, it doesn't. Nothing.
Ash, you mentioned
operates like that.
You mentioned like your conversation about Division III. It happens at all levels. I mean, I've had conversations where, you know, Power 4, you know, Division I universities with massive sports science budgets, and their softball team is going, I don't even know what questions to ask of our own lab. I don't even know, let alone what you guys have, let alone like what we collect in our team. We have all these resources on our campus and I don't know the questions to ask. And like that conversation to me is so easy. Start with our assessment. And then at least you know, it's not let me create a problem, this assessment, and we're telling you all your kids are terrible and then let's fix them. It's not that. Let's create this process that starts from a very foundational place and a very clear place where you know the baseline of all your athletes. And now you can go and leverage those things on your campus to say, okay, we're going to chase this path, this path, this path. You have a full-fledged, you know, biomechanics lab, fantastic, but it still falls to the coach to do something with that information. So even in the, you know, in these spaces where, you know, universities have sunk so much money into sports science, it still has a translation problem. Right. And so sometimes I get this feel of like, well, we can do it ourselves. I'm like, you probably can. That's not what we're trying to, not trying to replace anything. You should be leveraging your campus resources 1,000%. But it's sometimes they get paralyzed because they're like, we don't know where to start. Or we went to those people and they said, I don't know, here's the data. And now we're just stuck in this cycle of you have this data and have no way to make any sense of it. And even knowing the right questions to ask, let alone what am I tracking over time? I think it's just like, it's half the battle. And that exists at all levels. That's all levels of our.
Yeah.
In summary, that's how NFCA went.
Yeah. More to come on actually talking about NFCA, but that's what sparked my brain from the conversation. Our community's beauty and strength can be its weakness. And so here's how you need to think about that. And so
double-edged sword,
like,
man.
It's, as we all have.
I do think this is NFCA focused because we do end up having a lot of conversations. We end up being a litmus test, right? For some coaches of like, hey, have you heard about this new thing? And
absolutely. People that were texting, like, can I come over to the booth? Everyone's talking about X. Can I hear your thoughts on it? Can you be the neutral to help me? You're not like the competitor.
We need like
person. You're like
a
this
flow
neutral,
chart.
like,
we need a flow chart. Yes. Ask them this. What this? Think about this. Where are you going with this? It's like a flow chart.
Winter project right there.
Yeah, flow chart of the
you're
types
right.
of things.
It is NFCA related, but this was not. Let's tell you
an
how
NFCA recap.
Is like,
all right,
let's explain the insides of our brains post NFCA.
Bless anyone listening to this episode.
All right. Yes. Well, on that note, what I would say is like it might be a little like next week. Obviously, you know this will come out the week of Christmas, so that will be great. And you may or may not get an episode the week after that. More to come on how up the OGX team feels during our holiday break, which we take as well deserved to recording a podcast. But maybe we'll do like we did the spooky one, like a New Year resolution softball one. I feel like that'd be fun.
All I want for Christmas. Maybe that's what it'll be. We'll do an all I want for Christmas.
Yeah.
Our wish
There we go.
list.
Good one.
Our wish
Yes.
list. That's a good one.
Yeah.
Good one.
Yeah. So
like it.
more to come probably, and maybe we'll actually tell you an NFCA recap at
We'll
that
actually
point,
talk
so.
about what we say we're going to talk about, maybe.
Yeah, probably not. That's not really our vibe. But all right, until next time.